Hello and welcome to SecureWorld Behind the Scenes, our exclusive interview series. This is Tom Bechtold, your co-host for today's program. Thank you all for joining us. Today, Bruce Sussman from the SecureWorld Media team will be talking with Gretel Egan from Proofpoint Security Awareness Training and taking a look at the annual State of the Phish Report 2020. Before we begin, I'll give a brief introduction for our guests. Gretel Egan is the Security Awareness and Training Strategist for Proofpoint Security Awareness Training, the leading provider of information security awareness and training software that helps organizations educate their employees. She has extensive experience in researching and developing cybersecurity educational content and was named one of 10 security bloggers to follow by IDG Enterprise. And of course, we have my co-host, Bruce Sussman, Director of Digital Content. Bruce, take it away, sir.
Tom, thank you. And Gretel, thanks for joining us today. And I want to dive right in because I know a lot of CISOs who consider the State of the Phish as to be the industry benchmark report on phishing and security awareness. But we also know a lot of new people are moving into the security field. An increasing number of companies are focusing on security awareness and, building out teams to manage this sort of program. So for those who might not be familiar with the State of the Phish report, would you give us just a little background about the report?
Yes, happy to do that, Bruce. And first, I wanted to say thank you. You know how much I love to talk about State of the Phish, so appreciate any opportunity to do that. Yes, this is a report that we've been doing. This is now our 6th annual report. It's something we do annually, of course, and we really try to take a look at the pieces of data and the pieces of information related to the global phishing threat that are applicable for CISOs and other Infosec professionals, pieces of data that can really help drive their decision making, and we focus on actionable advice. This year, really the report, more data rich than ever. We pull data from a variety of sources, and the 4 primary sources that we analyzed this year were, first, we did a survey of more than 3,500 working adults across 7 countries, and those countries were the United States, Australia, France, Germany, Japan, Spain, and the United Kingdom. And I do want to stress that working adults, this is a particular audience that we wanted to target, people who are in the workforce right now. We wanted to see what these people know and do not know about cybersecurity terminology and best practices. And because we focus on that population, Infosec teams can really make some inferences about what their users may and may not know and think about how their organization might compare to the results that we found within our survey. We also did a survey of more than 600 IT security professionals across those same 7 countries. We had a mix of respondents across security roles, CISOs, IT managers, sysadmins, system engineers, a whole range of people, which was great to get that kind of varied feedback across the Infosec space. We also analyzed nearly 50 million simulated phishing attacks sent out by our customers over a 12-month period. This is a big jump from when we first started doing this report, which we were around 4.5 million simulated attacks back, 6 years ago. So huge jump there. And then we also analyzed data of suspicious emails that were reported by our customers and users, and they reported more than 9 million suspicious emails over that same 12-month period. So lots of stuff to look at, analyze, and we have a lot of great advice and insights for people this year.
Yeah, and the sheer volume of data that you're able to analyze and look through and draw results from, that's phenomenal. That's clearly one of the things that makes this year's report different from prior years. Are there other things that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, and as I said, we do look at actionable advice, but the thing that I really like about the process we took this year is we examined the different ways that we can look at the same data and really try to get as granular into data as we could. And so this year's report really serves as kind of a model for organizations. Absolutely, the benchmarking numbers are there, but we're also giving people a path to think about how they can get to the pieces of data within their organization that are going to reflect their mission and help them guide their security awareness training efforts in order to support the goals of their business and to address the issues that they're really seeing at that granular organization level.
Well, I've looked through the report myself, and I think you guys clearly accomplished what you set out to do. And one of the things you mentioned earlier about these different chunks of data that you were able to analyze, and I wanted to ask first about the survey of working adults, because as I was looking through there seemed to be some pretty eye-opening findings about people's cybersecurity knowledge and their behaviors. So what were some of the key takeaways that Infosec teams should know about?
So I think one of the primary things, and this is something that we've looked at in years past, is understanding if there's a language barrier within your organization. And what I mean by that is that, you know, those of us in the IT and InfoSec space, there's terminology that's very common to us, words like phishing and ransomware and malware. And we tend to use those very frequently. And I think in a lot of cases when we have conversations, we make the assumption that the people we're talking to also are familiar with those terms just because they are so commonly used in that space. And what we found when we did our global survey is that, again, there still is this disconnect at a very basic, you know, terminology recognition level among a lot of working adults. For example, when we asked what is phishing, when we asked that question, we asked the other questions, we provided 3 choices for people, 3 definitions that they could choose from to identify what is the right definition of this term. And we also gave an I don't know option, which, you know, frankly, someone saying they don't know and someone choosing a wrong answer, it's still an indication that they don't have awareness of that term on a fundamental level. So what is phishing? Only 61% of people globally got that answer correct. And honestly, this is a statistic that we see hovering around this mark year in and year out. And why is that? Because we have different people coming into the workforce who are answering these questions in these surveys. The age groups change. But that kind of level of awareness is still remaining the same. So, and with ransomware, we saw only 31% of people getting that answer correct. That was actually a decrease year over year. Last year, we saw 45% of people answering that question correctly. So really it comes down to, and what we're stressing with organizations is that they have an understanding of what people do and do not know. I would equate it kind of to an analogy that if you go into a doctor's office and the doctor comes in and provides your results to you, but they're going to talk to you, they're talking to you and using very complex terminology and advice that you really don't understand, you're not going to walk away from that interaction feeling good about the decision making, feeling confident that you understand how you're going to have to proceed. And, you know, so it is that if people are having a conversation with end users using terminology that end users don't understand, you're kind of starting at a negative place, and it's going to be difficult to progress. When we look at something, and this is how strong the disconnect is. I used this example in the webinar that we had last week as well about the report, but we asked what is malware. Nearly 30% of U.S. workers chose the definition that stated that malware is a type of hardware that boosts Wi-Fi signals. So it is important to understand how big the disconnect is in some ways and really what the starting point for an organization might have to be when you look at user understanding and of terminology.
Yeah, Gretel, that malware example, I mean, that blows me away, but I think it goes to show that those of us who talk security all the time and work in the space, malware is it's such a common thing, but that translation is crucial as we translate that elsewhere to those who aren't thinking about security all the time. So great insights. Thank you. Another one that I wanted to ask about was your survey of Infosec professionals. So we're looking at people, within security, and you highlighted some ransomware findings in the report that were really interesting. And the stat I'll just share with our listeners was more than 50% of organizations that had an infection in 2019 decided to pay the ransom, more than 50%. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it was, this was something that we really did want to dig into a little bit more this year. We didn't want to just understand how many people experienced a ransomware infection. We wanted to understand how they took action following that, whether they decided to pay or decided not to pay, and then if they decided to pay, how successful was that payment for them? And as you said, we did find that more than 50% of those who had an infection decided to pay. 33% of organizations were infected and opted for that payment. 32% were infected and opted not to pay. And then another 35% were not infected at all. But among those people that did decide that they were going to roll the dice and negotiate with attackers, a lot of them had a positive outcome. Almost nearly 70% got their data back following a ransom payment. And that might comfort people on some level, but that still leaves a significant chunk of people who outlaid money and did not get back what they expected to. More than 20% made the payment and never got access to their data. And then about another 10% had a follow-up demand that came back to them after making initial payments. And some people decided to walk away at that point, and others did pay the extra ransom and then did get access to their data. So I think really the cautionary tale here is, and obviously the FBI and most bodies are going to advise against paying a ransom, and I think there's good indication here of why that is risky. Yes, and you might end up in that 70%, but you also might end up in that 30% where you're putting money out and getting nothing for it. Certainly, I can understand why people would think about rolling the dice in that situation. I think especially if it's a very widespread infection and you're dealing, in a lot of cases, people are attacking hospitals and medical centers and other critical infrastructure organizations where those people services are so very important, and it becomes so difficult to be offline for an hour, let alone potentially weeks at a time. And I think some of the things that we've seen in the media where you have some of these organizations coming out and saying, hey, yeah, we got hit and we decided not to pay. And then they proceed to have months of issues in trying to get back up and running. So, definitely understand people's inclination to say, hey, maybe we'll take a chance and pay the ransom and be back up and running. Certainly a cautionary tale, though. People really need to think about it. Think about what they're willing to lose from a ransom payment should it be not effective. And, think about what it means to be flagged as a payer. We know that cyber criminals share information amongst themselves. So really critical to think about what that could be, what that implication is down the road if word gets out that you're someone who is willing to pay a ransom should you become infected.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned some of the negative outcomes from those who decided to pay, because I think the temptation to pay is becoming greater in many cases because hackers are using the leverage of, as you know, not just encrypting the data or threatening to wipe it, but threatening to expose it now. So actually exfiltrating that data first. And so regardless of your situation, I think the State of the Phish report makes clear you might get hit up a second time, or you just might get no solution out of your money. So that's really important information. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I do think not to interrupt you, Bruce, but I do think it is so important to look at this, and as you mentioned, kind of the blackmail route that some people are going. Not only have they infected you, but if you decide not to pay, then they're threatening to go public with certain things. So it becomes so much more important to avoid those ransomware infections entirely whenever you can. And of course, training users to understand how to spot dangerous attachments and dangerous links and correct those behaviors is becoming just more critical than ever.
Oh, you are not kidding. I mean, a lot more critical. They've upped the ante. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. And you can interrupt me anytime, by the way, Gretel. No worries. All right, so my next question is, thinking of the InfoSec professionals again, one of the things that is kind of a positive, not kind of, I guess really a positive, is that training users to recognize and avoid phishing has had some positive results. Nearly 80% in the report said their initiatives are reducing user susceptibility. That's great news, but my question for you, having looked at all the data, what do you think organizations are not doing enough of right now?
Well, one of the things we've talked about in the past is the need to go beyond once-a-year training. And I will say positively, this is great results here this year. We see very few organizations saying that they are relying on once-a-year training models in order to, make users more aware and teach them better behaviors. The one downside with that, though, is that still about 40% of organizations are only allocating an hour or less to training in a full year. So, we need to think about what can happen in an hour a year if we're really looking at helping people to learn new skills, break bad habits, and change behaviors. So I think the time constraints, those organizations that are being very restrictive in the amount of time that they're allowing users to dedicate to security awareness training, they do need to think about opening that up a bit. I understand, obviously, it is a challenging environment. There's a lot of training that needs to happen in a lot of industries every year. What I would counter with to people who are concerned about that is that cybersecurity behaviors have an opportunity to impact your business in a positive or negative way on a daily basis for sure, if not an hourly basis. So, thinking about what you want to get out of your program should really help to drive your desire to dedicate as much time as you possibly can to that. Now, one other thing that we saw is that only about 60% of organizations say that they're doing formal training sessions, either in person or online. The rest are really kind of relying on some of the more passive training exercises, and really they're not so much training exercises as awareness exercises. Things like newsletters and emails, awareness posters, and even simulated phishing attacks. Because my caution to organizations that are relying solely on simulated attacks to train users is that these are truly really more of awareness activities than they are training activities. What you're trying to make users aware of is this is an example of what phishing can look like. And you want to gauge, of course, their tendency to interact with that type of activity. However, one phishing email is just that, one phishing email. There are so many different ways that attackers craft their messages, so many different themes that they use. The coronavirus is a great example. There are phishing attacks out there about that right now. So there's always a different topic that attackers can turn to. So, simply relying on showing those singular examples to users and expecting them to then understand what the broader phishing threat really looks like and how their actions can, help them spot and avoid a myriad of attacks, it's a cautionary tale. You want to really think about formalized training sessions that kind of dig into a threat rather than a surface phishing attack that you're relying on to teach users everything that they need to know about phishing. And I will say the one thing that really stood out for me in the survey is that only about 16% of organizations are providing email reporting tools for employees. And that the way we operate with that is an in-client button. And what we advocate for is that organizations do implement these email reporting buttons, an easy way for users to alert Infosec teams and response teams to a potentially malicious attack within the network. Very few organizations taking advantage of that, which is such a powerful tool.
Well, this is the 6th annual State of the Phish, and I noticed the report has stressed that value that you mentioned of end-user email reporting for a couple of years now. And I'm just wondering, why is it you think that is so crucial for organizations?
So, what we see is that this is really an activity and a metric that is a much more reflective statistic for user attentiveness and the success of security awareness training. And the reason for that is, when you look at failure rates and click rates, these are things that obviously are important to know and important to understand. However, they should fluctuate. As you challenge users to recognize and avoid more sophisticated attacks, your failure rates should go up. And then again, should decline over time as you're giving people, more access to training and education. So failure rates, though valuable, are not necessarily reflective of how well users do and do not understand the phishing threat. In contrast, email reporting is an intent. Someone takes an intent, applies an intent, and takes an action based on something that they see in an email. So very critical, because that's really where we see the opportunity for security awareness training programs to come full circle and for organizations to quickly see the fact that users are starting to grasp more about email safety and security. For example, we can really see the value of reporting when we take a look at the findings of our industry reporting rates within the State of the Phish. And we looked at average reporting rates by industry, and we based those findings on the simulated phishing attacks that were reported by end users in those specific industries. And the top reporting rate was 20%. And the bottom reporting rate was 5%. So that in itself shows you how things can vary from industry to industry and certainly from organization to organization. But what's really interesting when we look at those top and bottom rates, finance was at the top at 20%, and education was at the bottom at 5%. Interestingly, both of these industries had the same user failure rate, which was 8%. So if we compare the fact that, these industries, if they look solely at their average failure rate, they're at 8%. But which industry really is having an advantage? It's finance, because we're seeing that their users are more likely to be thoughtful about the email that they're receiving and then forward that email on to their Infosec teams to take a look at. And obviously there are attacks that slip through perimeter defenses. When I talk about things coming full circle, you see that organizations are putting the awareness and training out there for users to learn skills that are beneficial to them and to their organization. The users are taking that knowledge and applying it on the email reporting side, and obviously creating a behavior that is beneficial to the organization, giving them the ability to address those active attacks on their network. So really such an important tool for organizations to use and to take advantage of.
Yeah, thank you for unpacking that. The way you explain that example on the percentages really makes clear the value of that end user email reporting. So appreciate that, Gretel. All right, well, I think our time's about up. I want to ask you one last question, though. I mean, the State of the Phish is a fantastic report. It's a must-read, not only for myself, but as I said, a lot of security leaders I know, they view it that way. But I'm wondering, what is the main reason that you think people should download and read State of the Phish? What are they going to get out of it?
Well, obviously, as I mentioned, there's a lot of benchmarking data. Average failure rates by industry, by department, that is also an important piece of the puzzle that a lot of organizations are not taking advantage of, gaining visibility into failure rates at the department level. We obviously go into a lot of information about reporting. The appendix has regional results to all the questions that we asked on the end user side and on the Infosec side. But really, I think the true value of this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that this report gives you a path to understanding the pieces of data that can matter within your organization that might be hiding there within the data that you're doing right now. So really following that path and helping you to look inward. That's where I think a lot of organizations are maybe missing the mark. They're not looking internal enough at the things that are happening within their organization. It's so important to understand not just an average failure rate across your organization, but to understand, what things look like at the department level. Who are the people in your organization that are being most targeted by threat actors? We call those people the very attacked people, or the VAPs within your organization. If you're focusing only on your VIPs, you are missing the boat. You are not understanding the ways that threat actors are approaching attacks on your organization. They are absolutely looking up and down and across org charts. They are not just targeting CFOs. They are absolutely doing their research, looking for those roles and responsibilities, the people that have opportunity and access, and then targeting those roles. So it's so important to use these pieces of more granular data to understand how to deliver the right training to the right people at the right time, which can really help you build a culture of security from a broad perspective, but also be agile enough to address the threats that are really pressing within your organization today.
That was a fantastic summary. Thank you so much, Gretel, and really appreciate your time hitting all the highlights today. Excellent and valuable, as always. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Gretel. Thank you, Bruce. Great job answering all the questions. If you haven't checked out the State of the Phish webcast, be sure you do. This is going to be, it's a 90-minute program that we did on January 30th. It really goes into some good detail on everything that we talked about today and then some. And download the report. It's part of the webcast. There's a lot of great information in there that security folks should be using. So definitely take advantage of this great stuff that we've got. That does bring us to the end of our time today. Definitely be sure to check our website for more interviews from industry leaders like Gretel. On behalf of the SecureWorld Media team, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening. This ends our broadcast. Thank you.